The bus was $75. Nobody else raised a hand. Not one bid on a 1979 Bluebird with no seats, no glass in the back four windows, and a floor rusted the color of dried blood. The auctioneer said the number twice, waited, and then said it a third time out of what looked like pity. Coy Rennick counted out 3 20s, a 10, and 5 ones on the hood of the county pickup because that was every dollar he had in the world, and he needed somewhere to sleep that wasn't a church parking lot. The impound yard sat on the east edge of Yreka, California, 40 minutes south of the Oregon line, and it smelled like wet gravel and transmission fluid. It rained that first night. Not hard, the kind of Siskiyou County rain that comes in sideways off Shasta and taps on sheet metal for 6 hours straight, one drop at a time like someone counting. Coy lay in the dark and listened to it hit the roof panels above him, a hollow tin sound with a rhythm to it, and underneath the rain there was the smell of the bus itself. Mildew soaked into 46 years of rubber matting, cold diesel, and mouse. He swept the aisle with a push broom he'd found behind the church dumpster. He laid a sheet of cardboard down over the worst of the rust. He put his sleeping bag on the cardboard, near the front, where the roof didn't leak, and he set out Duke's wool blanket beside it the way he had every single night for 4 winters. That's when Duke, 118 pounds of Rottweiler who had never once refused a command, walked past the sleeping bag, past his blanket, went 6 feet back down the aisle, and lay down on a bare-welded steel plate behind a rear-wheel well, and growled at the floor. He growled at it for 3 nights. On the 4th night, Coy borrowed an angle grinder from the church custodian. What was under that plate had been waiting since 1994, and a 15-year-old girl this county had already stopped looking for was about to come home at 46. Coy Rennick was 49 years old, 6'1", 190 pounds, and he'd been 230 of it for most of his adult life, which meant everything he owned hung on him now, like it belonged to a bigger man who'd stepped out of the room. Dark hair going gray at the temples in 2 clean streaks, cut short because he cut it himself with clippers in a gas station bathroom. A Navy anchor tattooed on his right forearm in 1996, faded now to the soft green-black that old ink goes, the fluke of it blurred where the skin had stretched and shrunk again. Steel-toed boots he'd worn 11 years, the left sole separating from the upper at the toe, held with a wrap of black electrical tape he replaced every couple of weeks. And he had eyes that held contact 1 second too long. People noticed it. Cashiers noticed it. It wasn't aggression, and it wasn't crazy. It was just what happens to a man who has spent 8 months being looked past, and who had gotten in the habit of making sure he was actually seen before he stopped looking. He'd driven long haul for 22 years. Reefer mostly produced out of the Central Valley, sometimes lumber north. 2.4 million miles, no chargeable accidents, a safety jacket in a duffel bag with 3 patches on it. Then on a Tuesday in Redding, he helped a warehouse crew break down a pallet that shifted wrong, and he felt something in his lower back let go like a strap parting under load. L4 ruptured. The surgeon in Sacramento used the word significant 4 times in one conversation and the word fusion once, and after that Coy could stand for 40 minutes, and then he could not. No CDL, no CDL, no work. He filed for disability in March. He was still waiting. The letters said the average processing time was 7 to 9 months, and then a letter said the file had been reassigned, and then a letter said additional documentation was required. And Coy learned that the difference between a man with a house and a man without one is sometimes only the length of a government backlog. He lived in his truck for 8 months. A 2007 Freightliner Columbia he'd been paying on for 6 years, with a bunk and a curtain and a photo of his mother taped over the CB. Then the note went 90 days past, and a man in a company polo shirt came to a Flying J outside weed with a set of paperwork and an apologetic face, and Coy handed over the keys himself because there is no point making a stranger take something from you when he's just going to take it anyway. After that, it was the parking lot behind Grace Fellowship on 4th Street, where Pastor Delvin Rooks let 3 or 4 men sleep against the fence line as long as nobody drank on the property. Coy had been on that fence line 11 weeks when he saw the flyer for the county impound auction stapled to the corkboard at the laundromat. He didn't want a bus. He wanted a roof for walls and a door he could close. Duke was 7 years old and 118 pounds, and none of it was soft. Black and rust. The rust worn pale on his chest where a harness had rubbed him before Coy ever knew him. Broad head, chest like the front of a wood stove, a notch missing out of the top of his left ear, an old healed over V about the width of a dime. He walked with his shoulders rolling and his head level, and he never wasted a step. Coy pulled him out of a drainage ditch at a rest stop on I-80 in Nevada 4 winters back. 21 degrees, 2 in the morning, and there was a sound coming out of the culvert that Coy first took for wind. Dog was maybe 3 years old then, 40 pounds underweight, chain collar grown into the skin on the right side, and he did not bite. That was the thing Coy never got over. A starving dog with a rope burn in his neck let a stranger lift him out of freezing water with 2 hands under his ribs. And he didn't bite. He just put his chin on Coy's shoulder and breathed. For years, and Duke had never disobeyed a command. Not once. Not the ones that mattered, down, stay, leave it back, and not the small ones either. He'd hold a downstay outside a Dollar General for 20 minutes with people walking past his nose. He'd leave a chicken bone on a sidewalk because Coy said 2 words to him in a normal voice. And in 4 years, Duke had never growled at nothing. He growled at exactly 3 things in his life. The man in Winnemucca who came at the truck door with a tire iron, a rattlesnake on a berm outside Los Baños, and a woman in a Barstow lot who tried to get Coy into a car. 3 growls in 4 years. Coy had come to understand that when that sound started up in that chest, it was not a mood. It was information. So on night 1, when Duke walked past his own blanket and lay down on cold rib steel with his chin 4 inches off the plate and made that low sound at the floor, Coy sat up in his bag and said, "Duke, here." Duke looked at him. He looked at him and did not move. That was the first time in 4 years that had ever happened, and Coy lay back down in the dark with the rain going on the roof and a feeling in his stomach he couldn't name. Night 2. Coy tried to make it normal. He moved the blanket back next to the plate, so at least the dog wasn't lying on bare metal. Duke stepped off the blanket and onto the steel. Coy moved the blanket on top of the plate. Duke pulled it off with his teeth, dragged it 2 feet, and laid down on the plate again. He wouldn't eat off the floor mat. Coy set the bowl in the aisle by the sleeping bag. Nothing. Duke looked at it, looked at Coy, and stayed where he was. Coy finally slid the bowl across the steel plate itself, and the dog ate every bit of it standing over that square of floor with his back feet planted like he was guarding a doorway. At 3 in the morning, it started again. Not barking. Barking is loud, and it's over. This was a long, low, sustained thing. 10 seconds, 15, running on and on under the rain, the kind of sound you feel through cardboard in a sleeping bag and into your spine. Coy said his name. The growl stopped. 10 minutes later, it started again. Night 3 was the same. 3 a.m., near enough. Coy checked his phone. 3:04. He got up, knees popping, back locking on him the way it always did in the cold, and he crouched down next to his dog on the floor of a $75 bus and put his hand flat on the plate. It was a piece of steel about 20 by 30 inches, set into the wooden subfloor behind the rear wheel well and welded at the corners. Not factory paint. Somebody had run a bead along all 4 edges by hand. And it wasn't a great bead either. Thick in places, skipped in others, the kind of weld a man lays down himself in a driveway instead of paying a shop. The rest of the floor was original ribbed matting with 40 years of shoe grit in it. This one square was different, and once Coy saw that it was different, he could not unsee it. He rapped it with his knuckles. Then he hit it with the side of his fist. It rang. Every other place he hit that floor, he got a dull thud. Steel over wood over frame, dead sound, no give. Over the plate, he got a ring. Hollow, like knocking on a drum. There was space under there. Duke stopped growling and watched him, and thumped his tail exactly twice against the metal. And Coy sat back on his heels in the dark and said out loud to a dog, "Okay, I hear you." The custodian at Grace Fellowship was a man named Emery Sledge, 63, who kept a shop in the Fellowship Hall basement and had once, without being asked, replaced the zipper pull on Coy's jacket with a paperclip and then a real one. On Thursday morning, Coy asked to borrow an angle grinder. Emery asked what for. Coy said, "There's a plate welded in the floor of that bus, and my dog won't get off it." Emery looked at him for a second and said, "You want the 4.5 or the 7-inch?" He came back with the 4.5, 3 cutting wheels, a face shield with a crack in it, and a 100-foot extension cord. He ran out the basement window across the lot because Coy did not have power and had not had power in 8 months. Night 4, a little after 8, in a gutted school bus with a work light hanging off the luggage rack. Coy put Duke outside on a lead tied to the fence. The dog did not want to go. He planted all 118 pounds of him, and Coy had to walk him out by the collar, talking the whole way, and Duke stood at the end of that lead facing the bus door the entire time with his ears up. The first cut took 11 minutes. Coy dropped the wheel into the weld bead at the near corner, and the grinder screamed and threw a rooster tail of orange sparks up the inside of the bus, bouncing off the ceiling, dying on the wet rubber floor. The smell went from mildew to hot iron. He burned through the first wool on the long edge, changed it, did the second long edge, then the short ends. His back seized twice, and he lay flat on the floor both times, breathing, waiting it out, then got back up on his elbows and kept cutting. At 8:51 p.m., the plate shifted under his hand. He got a pry bar in the gap and levered it. The steel came up with a sound like a nail pulled out of green wood, hinged on the last uncut inch, and Coy bent it back and pointed the work light down into the hole. It wasn't a hole a man had cut. It was a well. A factory-formed steel box recessed into the frame, maybe 18 inches deep. A floor safe, the kind old school buses and some panel trucks came with for cash boxes and route bags, and this one had been sitting under a welded lid for longer than Coy wanted to guess. There were 3 coffee cans in it. Folgers, the old red plastic kind with the lid still on, sitting upright and packed in tight with crumpled newspaper. Coy lifted one out and nearly dropped it because it weighed more than a coffee can has any business weighing 9 pounds. He pried the lid. Silver, stacked on edge, wrapped in strips of paper towel to keep them from rattling. Big coins, heavier than anything in circulation now. And when he tipped one out into his palm, the work light caught the edge of it, and he saw a woman's profile and a date. Morgan's silver dollars. He sat on the floor of that bus and counted them out onto the cardboard. 3 cans, stacking them in rows of 10, because that's how you count when your hand is shaking. 214. He counted the last row 3 times to be sure. A man who had $75 4 days earlier was sitting cross-legged on a rusted floor with 214 silver dollars in front of him, and he was not thinking about the silver. Because taped to the underside of the plate, the side that had been facing down into the dark for 31 years, was a manila folder sealed inside a gallon Ziploc bag, with 3 strips of duct tape gone hard and amber holding it to the metal. Coy peeled it off. The tape came away in stiff curls. The bag had held. The folder inside was dry, the corners soft but the paper clean, and through the plastic he could read a stamp in red ink that had faded to the color of weak tea. He opened it under the flashlight with the rain starting again on the roof. Siskiyou County Sheriff's Office. Case 94 to 1177. Hivok Dana Madi. Age 15. Inside, in order like someone had set it up to be read by a stranger someday. A handwritten statement, 2.5 pages, in the round, careful cursive of a kid who still made her lowercase g's with a full loop. The blue ballpoint had bled a little where her hand had rested. For Polaroids, the white border's gone yellow. Coy did not look at them long. He looked at them once and set them face down on the floor and sat there for a minute with his jaw working. A carbon copy work order receipt from Fairgrounds equipment vendor, October 1994, with a name printed in the contractor line and the same name signed under it in a hard slanted hand. And on top of all of it, a single sheet of departmental memo paper, folded once, with 11 words on it in blue ink, told to file this as RUNAWAY. I will not. Mercer, 11 marca 1994 roku. Outside, at the end of a nylon lead in the rain, Duke was still standing with his ears up, watching the door. He read the statement first, all 2.5 pages, because it was the only thing in the folder written by the girl herself, and it felt wrong to read anyone else before her. October 8th, 1994. A Saturday. Dana Marie Whitlock, 15 years and 4 months old, worked the 4-to-close shift at a concession stand at the Siskiyou Golden Fairgrounds in Wairika. Corn dogs, lemonade, a cash drawer she was not supposed to touch, and touched anyway, because the manager left at 7. She clocked out at 9:40 p.m. She lived 1 mile and 2/10 from that gate. She had walked it maybe 200 times. She wrote that she took 4th Street because Main had the bar on it. She wrote that a truck slowed twice. She wrote down what the truck looked like and the color of the tailgate, and the thing hanging from the mirror in the kind of detail only a kid who is scared enough to memorize things writes down. She wrote a name. She spelled it wrong the first time and corrected it above the line with a caret. And then she wrote what happened in the 11 days after, because Dana Whitlock did not disappear on October 8th. That was the part Coy had to read twice with his thumb pressed against the page to hold his place. She came home that night. She told her mother. Her mother drove her to the sheriff's substation on the 10th. She gave that statement across a desk to a deputy who wrote a case number on the top corner in blue ballpoint, 94 to 1177, and told her, in words she quoted, that she had done the right thing. She disappeared on the 19th. 9 days after that, the file was stamped. Coy turned the page, and there it was, angled across the intake sheet in red that had gone the color of weak tea. Runaway. No supplemental reports. No combus. No follow-up on the truck, the tailgate, the name spelled wrong and corrected. One line typed under the stamp. Subject has history of family conflict. No further action recommended. She'd had a history of family conflict the way every 15-year-old on Earth has a history of family conflict. She'd slammed a door in August. It was in a file. Somebody had written it down and used it. There was a photocopy of a missing person flyer in there, too, folded in quarters, the school picture kind. Dana in a maroon collar with her hair parted in the middle and a nervous half-smile, like she wasn't sure the photographer was done. Have you seen me? And under the phone number, in handwriting that was not the deputy's, not careful, pressed hard enough to emboss the paper. Please. She's my only one. Verna Whitlock. Coy sat with that in his lap on the floor of a bus he had paid $75 for. Because here's what he already knew without being told, the way you know weather. A woman had made that flyer. A woman had gone to a Kinko's or a library copier with a school photograph and a felt pen and paid by the sheet, and then she had walked Wairika and Montague and Granada and Weed and taped it to poles and laundromat corkboards and gas station doors. And she had done it in 1994, and again in 1995, and again in 1996, and again in 1997. And somewhere in there, she had started laminating them so the rain wouldn't take them. And somewhere in there, people had stopped meeting her eyes at the grocery store. For years of flyers. 31 years of a county courthouse saying there is no such case. And the case was sitting on a rusted floor at 2 in the morning under a flashlight, dry as the day it went in. The rain picked up. Coy pulled the folder against his chest without deciding to. It took him until almost 3 to work out the rest of it, and he worked it out the way a truck driver works things out, with paperwork. The bus had a title. He'd gotten it at the auction window with his receipt, a soft green California title in a plastic sleeve, and he'd shoved it in the glove box without reading past the year. He got out now and read all of it. 1979 Blue Bird, Chassis International. First owner, Siskiyou Joint Union High School District. Second owner, County of Siskiyou. And the third line, hand-typed on a typewriter that dropped its ease a half-step low. Mercer, Raymond, December 1995, county surplus sale. Mercer, the 11 words on the memo paper. The blue ballpoint in the top corner of a 15-year-old girl's statement. Ray Mercer had bought this bus. Not the district, not a contractor. A deputy sheriff had walked into a county surplus auction in December of 1995, 13 months after he was told to file a girl as a runaway, and bought the department's gutted hand-me-down bus for whatever a gutted bus went for. And then he had gone home and cut a hole in the floor above the rear wheel well, and set a plate over it, and welded it shut himself. Coy knew it was himself because he'd cut the welds off. They were ugly. They were laid by a man in a hurry with a stick machine and no third hand, and they had held for 3 decades anyway. The next line on the title was the one that took the air out of the bus. Fourth owner, back to the county of Siskiyou. Date, March 1996. You don't sell a bus back to a county in 3 months. The library opened at 10. Coy stood outside it in the rain at 9:52 with Duke tied to the bike rack and the folder inside his jacket, and he asked the woman at the desk how a person searches old newspapers, and 40 minutes later, a microfilm reader put it up in gray and white in front of him. Siskiyou Daily News. February 1996. 2 columns, no photograph. Deputy Raymond Mercer, 38, of Fort Jones, died Wednesday night when the vehicle he was driving left State Route 3 north of Callahan and rolled an estimated 4 times down an embankment. There was no other vehicle. Weather was clear. Deputy Mercer had served the department 11 years. He is survived by a wife and no children. Service is Saturday, 9 weeks after he hid the file. Alone on a mountain highway, clear night, single car, 4 rolls. Coy read it 3 times and did not let himself say the word he was thinking, because he had no proof of it, and a man with no proof who starts saying words like that gets called crazy, and then gets called dangerous, and then gets moved along, and he had been moved along enough for 1 lifetime. But he understood the coffee cans now. 214 Morgan silver dollars, stacked and wrapped. A working deputy's whole savings converted into metal that no bank statement records and no supervisor can subpoena. Ray Mercer hadn't hidden treasure. He'd hidden everything he had, his money and his conscience, together in the same hole, because he was a sheriff's deputy who no longer believed that the safest place for evidence was an evidence locker. He trusted a floor more than he trusted his own department. And he'd been right, in the worst way a man can be right. The file survived him by 29 years. Let me stop the story for 15 seconds, because this is the part where it turns. A homeless man with $75 in his pocket is about to do what an entire sheriff's department wouldn't do in 31 years. If you want to see how far he got, and you do, because it goes further than you think, subscribe. It costs you nothing. Coy had nothing too. Now back to the floor of that bus, for in the morning, rain letting up, a man sitting cross-legged with a dead man's evidence in his hands, and no phone, no address, no lawyer, and no reason on God's earth to believe anybody would take his word for anything. He could put the plate back down. That was a real option, and he sat with it honestly for a while. Sell the silver quiet. Buy a lot somewhere, be a man with a house instead of a man with a bus. And let a folder go back into the dark where it had been perfectly safe for 3 decades. Nobody would ever know. That was the whole trouble with it. Nobody would ever know except him. And he'd be sleeping 4 feet above it every night for the rest of his life. Duke was lying on the bare metal where the plate had been, in the open hole, on top of nothing, with his chin on his front legs. Yeah, Coy said. All right. At 8 a.m., he walked into the county administration building on 4th Street in Wairika in a canvas jacket with the folder under his arm and the tape still curled on the back of it. It took 11 minutes. He asked for the file on case 94 to 1177. The clerk typed. The clerk said there was no such case number in the system. He said he understood that, and said he had a copy of the intake sheet with the number on it, and could he speak to a record supervisor. He was asked how he came to have it. He said he found it in a vehicle he purchased at a county auction. That was the moment the temperature changed. He felt it the way you feel a truck's trailer start to push you on ice. A supervisor came out. 50-ish, half glasses, a lanyard. Did not take the folder, did not touch it, looked at it the way people look at something they've already decided is a problem. There was no case 94 to 1177. There was no deputy note. Any purported departmental record found in a private vehicle would have no chain of custody and no evidentiary value. If he had a legal claim, he should return with an attorney. I don't have an attorney, Coy said. I've got the girl's handwriting. Sir, if you'd like to file a public records request, the form is online. I don't have online. Then you can request a paper form. By mail. 11 minutes. He counted them later off the clock over the window because counting kept his hands still. He was halfway across the parking lot. Rain coming again, Duke standing up off the wet asphalt beside the truck ramp, when he heard heels on pavement behind him, fast. A clerk from the second window. Late 30s, county badge on a green lanyard, no coat, arms folded against the cold, already soaking. The name on the badge said S. Piedra. Sonia. They didn't look at Coy. They looked at the folder under his jacket, and then passed him at the doors they'd just come out of. I'm not talking to you, they said. I'm on break. Okay. Make copies. Today. More than one. A breath. And don't leave that in a bus. Then they turned and walked back inside and did not look at him again, and Coy stood in the rain in a county parking lot and understood that he had just been told he was right. The gray F-250 came into the church lot at 4:40 that afternoon. Clean. That was the first thing wrong with it. Every truck in Siskiyou County in March wears a foot of road film up the rocker panels, and this one had water beading on a wax job. It parked nose out 2 spaces off the bus and idled for a count of 10 before the engine shut off. The man who got down out of it was 76 years old and built like a filing cabinet, 6 foot even, heavy through the shoulders and the neck in a way that used to be muscle and had not entirely quit being muscle, a hard round belly on him, hands like a pair of work gloves left on a fence post. White hair, a stiff brush of it, cut every 3 weeks whether it needed it or not. A tan canvas jacket over a pressed shirt. A gold class ring on his right hand, turned inward so the stone sat in his palm. And boots, ropers, oiled, heels square and unworn, brand new. The kind of boots a man buys because he's going somewhere he wants to be taken a certain way, and not the kind of retired man wears to look at a bus. He walked the length of the Blue Bird once, slow, running one hand along the rusted flank the way you'd run a hand down a horse. Stopped at the rear wheel well, looked at the ground under it, then came around to the door where Coy was standing on the bottom step with a wrench he had not been using for anything. "That's a 79, the man said. "Body shot. It's a 79. I'll give you 4,000 cash for it. Right now, today." He was already reaching for a jacket pocket. Sentimental value. That was a department vehicle. I got a history with it. Coy did not move off the step. "Who am I talking to?" The man smiled with the bottom half of his face. "Dale Ostrand. I was sheriff of this county from 1988 to 2002. Bus isn't for sale. Son, that thing's worth $800 as scrap, and you paid? What, 75 for it?" The smile stayed. 6,000. "Not for sale. 8. No, $10,000 cash, and I'll have it towed off tonight, so you don't lift a finger." A step closer. The class ring turning slow against his palm. 12. 12,000. That's a man's whole year, and you know it. 90 seconds. From 4 to 12, in 90 seconds, in a church parking lot, for a gutted bus. Coy let get quiet. The rain had stopped. Somewhere behind the fellowship hall a downspout was still running. "Dana Whitlock," he said. The county went silent for about a second and a half. Ostrand's face did the thing Coy had been waiting for and hoping he wouldn't see, which is that it did not go blank with confusion. It went hard with recognition. The smile came off in pieces. "Where'd you get that name?" "Off her own handwriting." "That girl," Ostrand said, ran off. "That girl gave a statement to Ray Mercer on October 10th and named a man on a fairground work order. And there it was, the thing men like this can never leave alone, the correction, the need to be the one who explains it right. That man was my wife's brother." Ostrand said it flat, like a fact about weather. "You understand what the fairgrounds contract was to this county in 1994? 40% of our summer revenue. 40%. Rodeo, the fair, the concerts, the vendor fees, all of it ran through that outfit, and that outfit ran through him." He jabbed 2 fingers at the bus. "You put a 15-year-old's word about a truck slowing down in the paper next to that name, and you don't get justice. You get a county that can't make payroll. So you stamped her. A girl like that was going to run anyway." He said it the way you'd say a road was going to wash out. Mother working doubles, no father in it, sneaking out at night. She was gone by Christmas either way. I just put on paper before she embarrassed her mother in front of the whole town. He said out loud, in a parking lot, standing on new boots. And Duke, who had not made one sound since the truck pulled in, stood up off the plate. He came up the aisle slow. No sound at all. 118 pounds of black and rust moving over bare steel, and the only noise in that bus was his nails finding the ribs in the floor. Ostrand put a boot on the bottom step. "Get off my property," Coy said, and then heard how stupid it sounded. Because it wasn't his property, it was a church lot and a bus he'd paid $75 for, and the man on the step had run this county for 14 years. Ostrand climbed to the second step, then the third. He was inside the doorway now, filling it, the white brush of his hair catching the light off the fellowship hall. And his right hand went back, under the hem of that jacket at the belt line, in the way a man's hand goes when it knows exactly where it's going. Duke came into the stairwell. He didn't lunge. He didn't snap. He put himself down onto the bottom 2 steps like something poured out of a bucket, shoulders squared into the gap, head level with the old man's knee, and he barked. Once. One bark. Deep enough that Coy felt it in the floor plate under his own boots, in the empty steel of a stripped-out bus in his teeth. It went across that parking lot and came back off the brick of the fellowship hall and died, and then there was nothing but the downspout still running behind the building. Ostrin's hand came out from under the jacket. Empty. He backed down 2 steps like a man walking backward down a ladder in the dark, feeling for each one, not turning around, not once taking his eyes off the dog. At the bottom, he found his voice. That animal comes at me. They put it down. He didn't come at you, Coy said. He told you where the line was. You crossed it, and he told you again. Ostrin stood there in the gravel with his class ring turned inward and his boots too new, 76 years old, and Coy watched him do the math. Watched him look at the dog and the bus and the empty lot and count. He got in the F-250. He backed out over the wet gravel and turned onto the county road and was gone. Here's what neither of them looked at the whole time. There's a camera bolted under the eave of the fellowship hall, above the side door, pointed across the lot at the dumpster corral, because the church had a problem with people dumping mattresses. It is a cheap unit. It runs on a loop, and it writes to a hard drive in a supply closet next to the coffee urns. It had been running for 4 years. It had been running that morning. It had been running the entire 11 minutes Dale Ostrin stood in that lot and raised his price from $4,000 to $12,000, and then said out loud, in a voice the microphone caught clean, what he had done to a 15-year-old girl and why. Coy sat down on the bottom step of the bus with his hands shaking so hard he had to press them flat on his knees. Duke put his head across Coy's boot and stayed there. Then Coy stood up, walked into the fellowship hall, found the custodian who had loaned him the angle grinder, and said, Ken, does that camera keep audio? Ken thought about it. I think so. What? Coy said, don't let anybody near that closet. He was done with the county. He'd tried it their way. He'd stood at a records window with a dead deputy's handwriting in a Ziploc bag and been told in 11 minutes that no such case number existed, no such note existed, come back with an attorney. And a man who used to be sheriff had shown up at his bus before the ink was dry on that conversation. You don't need a law degree to read that. You need to have been alive. So at 1:40 that afternoon, he walked to the pay-by-the-minute phone the church kept for people in a situation, and he called Sacramento cold. The California Department of Justice, Missing Persons and Unidentified Persons Section, Cold Case Unit. He got a voicemail, and then a woman, and then a supervisor, and he said the same 6 things in the same order each time. Case number 94 to 1177. Siskiyou County. A deputy named Ray Mercer, deceased February 1996. A sealed evidence folder recovered from a welded floor compartment. A named suspect on a 1994 fairgrounds work order. And a former sheriff of this county who came to my bus this morning and offered me $12,000 for it. Then he called the Reading paper and asked for whoever covers Siskiyou County and got a reporter and told her the same 6 things, and she asked him a hold. And when she came back, she said she'd be in Wairika in 2 hours. He wasn't naive about it. He knew exactly what he was doing, and he said so later, plain, 1 copy of that file in 1 homeless man's bus is a fire waiting to happen. 3 copies in 3 buildings is a problem nobody can solve with a jerry can. By sundown, the folder had left his hands 3 times. Photocopies at the church office, page by page. Sonia Piedra's phone number written on the back of a bulletin. The originals into a DOJ agent's evidence sleeve at a Chevron in Weed at 7:15 that evening, receipt written out on the hood of state car. And a full set of images on the reporter's laptop, plus 11 minutes of parking lot video that Ken pulled off the supply closet drive with a thumbstick and his reading glasses pushed up on his head. Coy went back to the bus that night and slept on a foam pad on bare metal, next to a hole in the floor with the plate leaning against the wheel well, and he was worth more that night than he'd been worth in 8 months. And he still ate a can of chili cold. Because there was still the other thing in that floor. The silver went to Sacramento. The DOJ agent had made it clear the coins weren't evidence. They were Ray Mercer's personal savings, hidden with the file because he trusted a floor more than he trusted the evidence locker in his own building. And Mercer had no living heirs, a wife who remarried in Nevada and died in 2011. No children. Abandoned property recovered from a vehicle lawfully purchased at county auction. It took a title check, a probate search, and a letter, and then a certified auction house on Fulton Avenue took delivery of 3 coffee cans. 214 Morgan silver dollars. The cataloger laid them out on black velvet under a lamp with a loop and a pair of cotton gloves, and Coy stood in a room with carpet for the first time in 8 months and watched a man in a sweater vest pick up his life 1 coin at a time. Most of them were common. Good, honest, circulated silver from the 1880s, worth $30 and $40 apiece. The kind of man puts back a couple a month for 20 years on a deputy salary. But in the bottom can, the one with the rust ring and the lid taped down with electrical tape, the one Ray Mercer never got into, there was an 1893S and a paper flip with a pencil date on it, and there were 2 1889 CC, Carson City, and the cataloger stopped talking for a while, and then went and got somebody else. The sale ran on a Saturday. Lots 118 through 131. Coy sat in the 4th row in a shirt Sonia Piedra's husband didn't need anymore, with his back screaming from the folding chair, listening to a man he'd never met talk faster than anybody has a right to. The hammer total was $61,000. He didn't stand up. He didn't make a sound. They handed him a printed settlement sheet at the desk in the hallway, and he read it 3 times and folded it in half and put it in his shirt pocket. And then he went out to the truck he'd borrowed and sat in the parking garage with a 118-pound dog breathing on the back of his neck. The last money Coy Rennick held had been $75 in 1s and 5s, counted out twice on a metal table at an impound auction because he wanted to be sure. He was 50 by then. Birthday came and went in that bus. The file cracked it in 9 weeks. Here's how, because it's simpler than anybody wants it to be, and that's the part that should make you sick. The name on 1994 Fairgrounds work order. The man Dana Whitlock named in her own handwriting. The man whose truck slowed down twice on Fairlane Road. The man who was Dale Ostrin's wife's brother. That name went into a database in Sacramento on a Tuesday. By Friday, it had a 1997 alias attached to it out of a Josephine County, Oregon fraud file. The alias had a vehicle. The vehicle had a registered address. And at that address, in 1997, there was a 17-year-old girl listed as a household member under a name nobody in California had ever typed, Dana Reyes. She had not vanished. She ran. She was 15 years old in October of 1994, and she walked home from shift at the Fairgrounds concession stand, and something happened on Fairlane Road, and she did the one right thing a kid can do. She went and told a deputy. Ray Mercer wrote it down. For Polaroids. A statement in careful cursive with the loops still round. The way you write when you've just learned they'll believe you if it's neat. And 9 days later the county stamped her runaway. And Ray Mercer wrote on a note in his own hand, told to file this as runaway. I will not. And a 15-year-old girl in a small town learned that the only man with a badge who believed her had been overruled by the man who wore the biggest one. So she left before they could make her a liar in front of the whole town. She got out of Siskiyou County, and she never used her own name again. Not once. Not on a lease. Not on a paycheck. Not on a hospital form when she had her son in 2003. 31 years of being somebody else, because being herself hadn't worked out. She was 46 years old. She lived in Klamath Falls, Oregon, 80 miles up 97 from the parking lot where her mother had handed out flyers for 4 years. 80 miles. Verna Whitlock is 71. 5'2". Thin the way people get when worry has been doing the eating for them. White hair, cut short and practical. Glasses on a beaded chain. A windbreaker over a Wairika Rotary Club sweatshirt. Hands with the knuckles gone thick from 38 years of restaurant work. The double she was pulling in 1994 that Dale Ostrin held up as evidence her daughter was trash. They told her there was a development in the case and asked her to come to Klamath Falls. That's all. A DOJ victim advocate drove her. Verna asked twice in the car whether they had found remains, and both times the advocate said, "Ma'am, I'm not the one who gets to tell you," and Verna went quiet and looked out the window at the lava fields for 40 minutes. The lot was behind a county building. Gray asphalt, a chain-link fence, some junipers, gulls on a light pole, because Klamath Falls has gulls 80 miles from any ocean. They walked Verna out and stood her by the car. And a door opened across the lot, and a woman came out. 46 years old, 5'4", gray coming in at the part, wide through the shoulders now, jeans and a green fleece and canvas shoes, walking slow across the asphalt with her hands nowhere in particular. And on her face, Coy saw it and had to look away because he'd been staring at the 1994 school photo on that missing flyer for 9 weeks. The same nervous half-smile. Left corner up a little higher than the right. 31 years and a whole different life, and the mouth doesn't forget. Verna's legs went. The advocate caught her under the arm. Nobody said the words. Not who is that? Not is that her. Verna Whitlock made a sound that isn't in any language and started across the parking lot faster than a 71-year-old woman should be able to move, and her daughter met her about 2/3 of the way, and there is 38 seconds of footage of the two of them holding onto each other in the middle of an empty county parking lot in Oregon that nobody who has seen it has been able to describe properly since. When Dana could talk, the first full thing she said wasn't her mother. She said, "Where's the bus?" It was parked at the end of the row. Coy had driven it up himself, 4.5 hours at 52 miles an hour on 97 with the windows rattling. She went up the same rubber-treaded steps, walked 6 feet back, past the wheel well, and stood over the open floor with the plate leaning against the wall, and looked into a factory safe, well, she had never seen in her life and did not know had existed, where a dead deputy had put her words in a Ziploc bag in 1994 because he couldn't think of anywhere else in that county they'd be safe. Then Dana Whitlock lay down on the bare steel floor of a school bus. On her side, on the plate, one arm folded under her head. And Duke, who had lain on that exact square of metal every night for 4 nights and growled at it at 3 in the morning, who hadn't taken his own blanket, who wouldn't eat unless the bowl was on the steel, Duke came down the aisle and laid down against her back and put his chin on the floor. He didn't growl. Not that day. Not once after. Coy stood in the doorway with his hat in his hands and let it be theirs. Dale Ostrand was arrested on a Thursday morning at his home outside Montague. He is charged with felony obstruction of justice, conspiracy, and destruction and concealment of evidence. And the district attorney has said publicly that more is coming as the 1994 material is worked. His attorney says he's a 76-year-old man in poor health who served this county for 14 years. 11 minutes of parking lot video says other things in his own voice, and a jury is going to hear all of it. The case was reopened under the original number. Not new file. Not a fresh case with a clean date on it. 94 to 1177. The same number Ray Mercer wrote on a folder before somebody told him to make it go away, and he wouldn't, and he welded it under a floor and died on highway 314 months later with it still open in his handwriting. Coy Rennick bought 2.5 acres outside, weed with a good well on it. $16,000. He put in a septic permit and a propane tank and a gravel pad, and he parked the bus on the pad, and that's where he lives, a 1979 Bluebird with a wood stove in it now. Insulation in the walls, a window that opens, and a patch square in the floor 6 feet behind a rear wheel well that he did not weld shut and never will. Somebody asked him why he didn't buy a house. He said he had one. Verna and Dana talk every day. There's a grandson, 22, who did not know he had a grandmother in California. And there's a dog who sleeps wherever he wants now and mostly picks the plate. $75. 214 silver dollars. 31 years. One dog who wouldn't move off 1 square of floor. A dog knew. 3 nights running, he told a man who had nothing left that there was something under that floor. And the man listened, which is the part most people don't do. If Duke had curled up on the blanket like any other dog, Dana Whitlock would still be a runaway on a county stamp. So tell me, that 4th night, standing there with a borrowed grinder in your hands and a dog that won't move, would you have cut the floor, or would you have moved the dog? Yes or no? Down in the comments.